I never thought I'd see the day my wife would choose a horse over me. The words echoed in my mind as I sat alone in our living room, watching the clock tick past midnight. She'd been gone for hours, with no explanation, no word of where she was. And this wasn't the first time. It all started a few months ago. She'd grown distant, slipping out of bed late at night, disappearing for hours on end, her phone always tucked away out of sight. At first, I thought she just needed some time to herself. Marriages go through phases, right? People change, they need space. But this felt different. I'd catch her staring out the window, her gaze far away, as if lost in some secret world only she knew about. And when I asked her where she'd been or what she was thinking, she'd just smile, a quiet, secretive smile that left me feeling like an outsider in my own home. And then there was the time I saw her brushing out her hair, humming softly to herself, her cheeks flushed with a happiness I hadn't seen in years. I asked her what was going on, and she laughed, saying I was being paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. As the days went by, the strange behavior only continued. She'd spend hours out in the yard, staring toward the stables with a dreamy look in her eyes. One afternoon, I saw her out there, lingering by the fence, reaching out to stroke the mane of the large, dark horse we kept in our stable. It was a gift I'd given her last year for her birthday. She'd always loved horses, had grown up around them, but her affection for this one was different. She spoke to it in hushed tones, laughed quietly to herself as she stroked its coat, whispering words I couldn't quite hear. There was a look in her eyes that unsettled me, a softness, a kind of closeness that seemed far more intimate than I'd ever seen. It was as if she was sharing a private joke, something meant only for them, a bond that I couldn't understand. The way she looked at that horse was the same way she'd once looked at me. Then came the late-night trips. She'd slip out of bed after she thought I was asleep, making her way downstairs as quietly as she could. I'd hear the back door click shut, the sound barely audible, but enough to wake me. And every time, I'd lie there in the darkness, feeling a growing pit of dread in my stomach. One night, I decided to follow her. I waited until I heard the door shut, then slipped out of bed, watching from the window as she made her way out to the stables. She moved slowly, almost cautiously, glancing over her shoulder as though afraid of being seen. I watched as she opened the stable door, disappearing into the darkness. Minutes passed, the silence thickening around me. I wanted to go out there, to confront her, to demand to know what was going on. But something held me back, a strange sense of unease that made my skin crawl. When she finally returned, her steps were lighter, a small smile playing on her lips. She looked content, peaceful, and as she slipped back into bed beside me, I lay there, wide awake, the weight of her secrets pressing down on me like a heavy stone. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I replayed it over and over in my mind, each detail gnawing at me, filling me with a sense of betrayal I couldn't explain. I'd always known she loved horses, but this was different. There was something strange, something almost intimate in the way she treated this one. I decided to confront her that evening, to finally get some answers. But as I opened my mouth to speak, she looked at me with a hint of guilt in her eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. "Is everything all right?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. She hesitated, then nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" I wanted to push further, to demand an explanation, but the look in her eyes stopped me. There was a sadness there, a kind of resignation that made me feel as though I was losing her piece by piece. "You just seem different," I said quietly. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of regret. "I know," she whispered. I don't know how to explain it." And with that, she turned away, leaving me alone with 100 unanswered questions. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her, that some invisible force was pulling her away from me. I tried to ignore it, to brush off my concerns as nothing more than paranoia. But each time I saw her slip out of the house, each time I caught her lingering by the stables, the sense of betrayal grew stronger. I knew I had to find out the truth, whatever it took. One evening, as she sat beside me on the couch, her eyes distant, I decided to bring it up once more. "You've been spending a lot of time with the horse lately," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. She looked at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, then shrugged. "He's calming. You know how much I love horses. It's just nice to have something dependable." There was something in her voice, a soft undertone that didn't sit right. I knew she loved animals, but this was different. The way she spoke about the horse felt almost personal, as if he were more than just an animal to her. I couldn't explain it, but the feeling gnawed at me, filling me with a strange, quiet dread. "Dependable?" I echoed, my voice tinged with disbelief. "What's that supposed to mean?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering to the side. "Nothing. Just sometimes it's easier to be around him than other people." Her words stung, and I felt a surge of anger that I struggled to suppress. Was she really saying that she preferred the company of a horse over me? The thought felt absurd, but I couldn't deny the growing distance between us, the way she seemed to drift further away each day. The late-night disappearances continued, each one a reminder of how far she'd slipped away. I began watching her more closely, paying attention to the smallest details, hoping to find some clue, some hint that would explain what was happening. One night, I followed her to the stables again, keeping a safe distance as I watched her disappear into the dimly lit barn. She moved with a careful, almost practiced ease, as though she'd done this 100 times before. I waited outside, my heart pounding as the minutes dragged by. Every so often, I'd hear her voice, soft and soothing, as if she were speaking to someone. The way she lingered, the quiet laughter that slipped out, it all felt so intimate. And each time I thought about going inside, about confronting her, something held me back. When she finally emerged, her steps were light, her face flushed with a happiness I hadn't seen in years. She looked complete, as though whatever she'd found in that stable had filled some void within her. As she walked past me, I felt a chill run down my spine, a quiet realization settling over me. She wasn't just spending time with the horse. She was hiding something I wasn't meant to know. I couldn't hold back any longer. That night, as we lay in bed, I turned to her, my voice barely steady. "What's going on with you?" She looked at me, her expression guarded. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," I replied, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "You've been spending all your time out there, slipping away like you're hiding something. Don't you think I deserve an explanation?" For a moment, she just stared at me, her gaze filled with a sadness that I couldn't quite understand. "It's complicated," she said softly. "I don't expect you to understand. Try me," I challenged, feeling the tension build between us. She took a deep breath, her hands twisting in her lap. "I just feel a connection there. Something I can't explain. It's like he understands me in a way no one else does." Her words cut deep, and I felt the anger rising within me. "You're telling me a horse understands you better than I do?" She didn't respond, her silence only deepening the ache in my chest. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but the look in her eyes stopped me. There was something there, a quiet vulnerability that made me hesitate, made me wonder if there was something more to all of this. But before I could say another word, she turned away, leaving me alone in the silence, the weight of her secrets pressing down on me like a heavy stone. The days that followed were filled with tension, each moment a reminder of the rift that had opened between us. I tried to be patient, to give her the space she seemed to need, but the curiosity was eating away at me, filling me with a need for answers that I couldn't ignore. One evening, as she left for the stables once more, I made a decision. I'd go inside this time. I'd see for myself what was going on, no matter how much it hurt. I waited until she'd been gone for a few minutes, then slipped out of the house, making my way to the barn. The air was thick with tension, the silence around me heavy as I approached the stable door. Inside, the dim light cast long shadows over the walls, and I could hear her voice, soft and soothing, as she whispered to the horse. I took a step forward, my breath catching as I strained to hear her words. But as I drew closer, the floor creaked beneath me, the sound breaking the silence. She looked up, her eyes widening as she saw me standing there. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice tinged with both surprise and fear. "I need to know." I replied, my voice barely a whisper. I need to know what's going on. She looked away, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her secrets had finally become too much to bear. You wouldn't understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. Try me, I said, my heart pounding. She hesitated, then turned back to the horse, her hand resting on its mane. It's just he makes me feel alive, in a way I haven't felt in years. Her words hung in the air, filling me with a sense of loss that I couldn't explain. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but the sadness in her eyes held me back, leaving me standing there, helpless and alone. I couldn't take it any longer. The silence between us, the unspoken bond she had with that horse, everything was tearing me apart. Each night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the fragments of conversations we'd had, the late-night disappearances, the look in her eyes when she returned. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage, shut out of a world that I wasn't meant to understand. One evening, I confronted her again. You've been different, and you know it. You can't keep pretending this is normal. She looked at me, sadness flickering across her face. Why does it bother you so much? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because it's as if I'm losing you, I replied, my voice trembling. And I don't even understand what to. She sighed, her gaze drifting to the window, where the fading light cast long shadows over the stable. It's just he's constant, strong. He doesn't judge, doesn't ask questions. It's like I can finally just be myself. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, a painful reminder of how distant we'd become. I wanted to demand answers, to shake her from this dreamlike trance she seemed to be caught in. But the vulnerability in her gaze held me back. I wish I could explain it better, she said quietly, her voice filled with regret. But I don't expect you to understand. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with everything we couldn't say. She turned away, slipping out the door without another word, leaving me standing alone in the dim light. After that conversation, I became consumed with the need to know more. I started keeping a closer eye on her, following her movements, watching for any clue that would explain this strange attachment she had developed. But no matter how closely I looked, she remained a mystery, her motives hidden behind that quiet, secretive smile. One night, after she had once again disappeared into the stable, I followed her. This time, I was determined to find out what was really happening, to catch her in whatever secret she was keeping. I kept my distance, watching from the shadows as she entered the stable, her figure barely visible in the dim light. For a moment, I hesitated, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me. But the curiosity, the desperation, was too strong. I stepped forward, inching closer, my heart pounding as I strained to hear her voice. Thank you, I heard her whisper softly, her voice filled with emotion. You have no idea how much this means to me. I froze, my mind racing. Her words were gentle, filled with a warmth and affection that I hadn't heard in her voice for years. And as I stood there, listening to her murmurs, I felt a pang of jealousy, a sense of betrayal that I couldn't shake. Days later, my frustration reached a boiling point. The ambiguity, the secrecy, the late-night visits to the stable. Each piece of the puzzle felt like it was slipping further out of reach. I was desperate for answers, for something that would explain why my wife had become so distant, so lost in this strange, secret world. One evening, while she was in the shower, I decided to take a closer look around her things, hoping to find any hint, any clue that could explain her behavior. My hands trembled as I sifted through her belongings, feeling a mixture of guilt and desperation. Then, buried deep in her drawer, I found a small notebook. My heart pounded as I opened it, flipping through the pages filled with sketches and small, scribbled notes. There were rough drawings of a horse, his large frame sketched with careful detail, his eyes filled with a warmth that seemed almost human. But it was the notes that sent a chill down my spine. Only he understands me. One line read. With him, I don't have to pretend. The words echoed in my mind, each one a painful reminder of how far we'd drifted apart. I felt a surge of anger, a need to confront her, to demand answers once and for all. When she came out of the shower, I was waiting for her, the notebook clutched tightly in my hands. She froze when she saw it, her face paling as she realized what I'd found. "Is this it?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Is this what you've been hiding from me?" She looked down, a mixture of guilt and sadness in her eyes. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Try me," I replied, feeling the desperation rise within me. She hesitated, then took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "I needed someone who could give me what you couldn't. Someone who wouldn't judge me, who wouldn't question my choices." Her words hit me like a punch, each one a painful reminder of how distant we'd become. I felt the anger, the betrayal, bubbling up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "So you chose a horse over me?" I asked, my voice barely steady. She didn't answer, her silence only deepening the ache in my chest. The truth was clear now, written in her eyes, in the quiet resignation that had settled over her. I turned away, the weight of our broken relationship pressing down on me like a heavy stone. The woman I'd known, the woman I'd loved, was gone, replaced by someone I could no longer understand. I felt hollow after that last confrontation, my mind racing with unanswered questions and the gnawing feeling that I'd lost my wife to something I couldn't even comprehend. Each night as she left for the stable, I was haunted by images of the two of them, my wife and that horse, sharing something secret, something forbidden. It felt like an obsession I couldn't shake, a darkness that filled every corner of my thoughts. But the worst part was that I still didn't understand. I was an outsider in my own marriage, left to piece together fragments of a truth that didn't make sense. And with every clue I found, the reality felt stranger, more twisted. One night, I decided it was time to put an end to the secrecy. If she wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it out for myself. Late one night, after she had disappeared into the stable yet again, I followed her, keeping to the shadows, my steps silent as I moved closer. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing with questions. I was determined to catch her, to confront her with whatever truth she was hiding. As I approached the stable, I heard her voice, soft and filled with warmth, as she murmured something I couldn't quite make out. The intimacy in her tone sent a chill down my spine, a reminder of everything I'd lost. She laughed quietly, a sound I hadn't heard in years, and I felt a wave of jealousy and anger wash over me. How could she be so happy, so content with something that wasn't me? The thought felt absurd, surreal, yet there was undeniable. I took a deep breath, steeling myself as I stepped forward, determined to uncover the truth once and for all. Just as I reached the door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Startled, I pulled it out, glancing down at the screen. A message from her best friend, Maggie. "You need to know the truth about Horse." My heart skipped a beat, the timing too strange to ignore. I opened the message, my eyes scanning the text with a mixture of dread and anticipation. "Horse isn't what you think. It's just a nickname for someone a friend of hers from years ago. It's a private joke between us. Please don't take it the wrong way." My mind spun, struggling to process her words. A nickname? All this time, I believed I was losing my wife to something unspeakable, something beyond my understanding. But it had been nothing more than a misunderstanding, a twisted interpretation of innocent actions. I took a shaky breath, my heart pounding as the truth settled over me. Horse was just a friend, a person, not the animal I'd feared. All those nights she'd spent at the stable, all the whispered conversations, they'd been nothing more than innocent moments with an old friend. I felt a wave of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by a deep sense of regret. All the accusations, the jealousy, the nights spent lying awake, tormented by thoughts of betrayal. It had all been for nothing. I'd pushed her away, driven by a misunderstanding that had taken on a life of its own. As I stood there, the weight of my actions settled over me, filling me with a hollow sense of loss. I'd let my own insecurities, my own fears, destroy the trust we'd once shared. Slowly, I turned away from the stable, the truth heavy in my heart. I'd never meant to hurt her, never meant to doubt her. But now it was too late. The damage had been done, the distance between us a reminder of everything I'd let slip away. I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs as I began the long walk back to the house, alone with the weight of my own mistakes.